Welcome, everybody, to another Bangers and Classics podcast. We're still going, limping along with me, James Ruppert, and him, David Malloy. And where's David been and what's he been up to?
Well, for some of the week I've been in limp home mode.
All right.
But yeah, it's been a busy old week. Finally finished the new book, the Ultimate Classic Car Quiz Book 2, which is part quiz book, part narrative book. It's a hybrid book. It's now available on Amazon, and 25% of the royalties go to charity. Front cover is worth the price on its own, I reckon. It's by a guy called Russell Wallace, who's a very talented illustrator. So yeah, there's been that. I've had more fun and games with the Jeep, which I won't go into because it would take too long. But suffice it to say that I've now got arms like Popeye after the spinach. Yeah. So that's that. Oh God, got some car spots for you.
Oh, good.
Yes. I was driving through Glasgow, south side of Glasgow last weekend, and on the way back, happened to glance at what had been or sometime a forecourt, and on it sat a white Porsche 924 with its headlamps up. It was stationary. I don't know if the mechanism wasn't working or whatever, but the lamps were up, but they weren't illuminated. However, it was there. Not a 924S, this is one of the original 924s. So I saw that, but a little while later, and I saw it twice, once in another direction that actually passed me on the second occasion, was a rather beautiful and very rare car, a TVR 350C in a lovely shade of blue. And it looked in absolutely stonking condition, James. It wasn't being ragged or hooned. It was being driven very sensibly, very appropriately to the conditions. But it was a sight for sore eyes. I really appreciated seeing that. So whoever owns it, thank you for taking it out for a spin in not the finest of weather and brightening up a rather sombre day. And there was one more. There's a hat trick of classic car spots this week. I spotted this one before, and it was much the same place. Well, it's in the same place, but not exactly the same location. It certainly moved from one location to another. It's a Lancia Delta Integrale 8-valve, and it's a house adjacent to where we buy animal feed, and it's a sort of burgundy colour. I don't know the official Lancia colour for it, I have to say, but it's clearly being moved, and I presume it's being used on the roads. So that's jolly good as well. So 3 fine cars, all sporting cars, seen in this course of a couple of days. I was well chuffed with that.
Well done to you, David. That's you've got you've won the spots of this week quite clearly. A bit of good news at my end, David. Battery troubles seem to have been solved. In that, I do have an unwell battery, and let that be a lesson to all you people considering buying an EV. You never know, your batteries could go. But obviously, this is an old lead acid job. But the company's been very good, and they're posting me a new one, and I just have to post the dead one back. So There you go.
What about the one for the Land Rover? I mean that's you sorted.
Well, there you go, David. I will look forward to seeing that. Apparently, it's coming on Monday. Apart from that, I saw a Saab 900 convertible, which you used to see a lot of, but that was quite an interesting spot, really. It was hood up, but it was still nice to see because it's one of those cars that you used to see everywhere, and now you don't see anywhere, pretty much. So that was good. And there was a spot from a few weeks ago where I basically saw a Land Rover Speedster, and I was driving at the time, and I couldn't spend a lot of time looking at it, but it did look like an 80, very short wheelbase, but it had no cab, it had no windscreen or anything, and also the paintwork had been rubbed back to the lightweight stainless steel, so it was quite an interesting sight. So I would have liked to have doubled, but unfortunately I was going somewhere, had to do something, but it would have been nice to find out a bit more about that, what the chap was doing with it. But he was actually in a field with it, so it wasn't just a spot on the road, he was actually in a field. So I might have to go back to that field to see if he's maybe still stuck there.
Right.
But that's it for me this week.
Yeah, it's funny you mention a Saab 900 convertible. I know a story about that, and I don't think I can tell it on the podcast. I'll tell it to you during the break, and you can come back to me and tell me if you think it's appropriate or not. Okay. I would have to, shall we say, redact certain names from it.
Yeah.
For reasons that will become abundantly clear. It's in the same category as a story about white Ford Escort XR3i convertible that I'll also tell you. I wasn't present on either occasion. I know of some of the people involved, but I am led to believe these are true stories. Anyway, moving on from that, James, I'd like me to pay tribute this week to one of the greats of motoring journalism, and indeed a very fine racing driver.
Well, he is quite simply one of the greats of driving. Really, he really was. And also, he was an extremely nice chap. I did meet him a few times. He was also an extremely tall chap, as you pointed out to me.
Mm,
But Tony Dron was
yes.
a very very nice chap. So I mean, all I can remember about him is that he smiled. I mean, we did talk, but he was just a very jovial, very pleasant chap, and also a very modest one, because he could have really thrown his weight around, because compared to most of us, he could drive cars magnificently,
Mm,
and he excelled in many formulas, and I think he won many hundreds of races. And he was a works driver, and it takes
yes.
you back to the days when people who wrote for car magazines were qualified to do something, and
Yeah.
he's one of those. And he's also was a fellow car salesman. He did sell Saabs and Porsches roughly around the same time as me, oddly enough, um,
Yeah.
before he went sort of full time. But that also proves that racing cars didn't really pay the bills. You had to go and do something else. You
No.
really did have to go and earn a living. But no, we're very very sorry to hear it, and all our sympathies to the family. But what a life lived! That's the way to do it.
Yes, indeed. I mean, for those who don't know who Tony Drawn was, and one or two of you may not be so familiar with him, Tony Drawn wrote for Motor Magazine initially, and he wrote very well for Motor Magazine. But he wasn't just comfortable behind the typewriter, he was very comfortable behind the wheel of a racing car. He drove in Formula 3, and unfortunately, in 1976, he was lumbered with the Triumph engine March Formula 3. Nobody could really do anything with it over a few years. And of course, Tony Drawn was 6'5", so single-seater racing cars weren't really designed for a guy of his height.
Mm.
However, the next couple of years, he drove in what is now the British Touring Car Championship and was then the British Saloon Car Championship, and he drove a Unipart-sponsored Triumph Dolomite Sprint. He tied in points for the overall title in 1977, I believe, and he only lost it in countback. Now, in those days, the championship was run in classes. There were 4 classes. His car ran in Class C, which was the second top class. They were measured by engine size. And the chap who won it was in a lower class, which had probably, to be fair, had a little bit less competition. But John's mastery of the Dolomite Sprint was such that he often beat, for outright race wins, the cars in Class C, the 3-litre Caprice, and his 2-litre Dolomite Sprint. That is no mean feat. That in itself speaks volumes about his ability as a driver. He then went on, as James says, to sell cars, and I think he was the first editor of Thoroughbred and Classic Cars magazine.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I never met Tony Drawn. I always enjoyed his writing, and I remember reading about his exploits behind the wheel of racing cars, and I always thought, what a talented guy. And, again, as you say, James, we're much saddened by his passing.
Well said, David.
Well, it's the truth,
Mm.
It's the truth. What can we say?
No.
Yeah.
And I think the only other thing we wanted to mention, which has come up in our conversations recently, has been the Morris Minor Centre, and
Of course.
it does seem that it's not the parts side and it's not the sales side, but the restoration side is going into liquidation. There has been an announcement this week, which is sort of very very sad, really. But I think it's a reflection of one of those things that actually restoring a car properly, as opposed to just slapping some paint on it, is a very expensive business, and getting people to pay the requisite amount to make a car properly roadworthy probably proved too much. They did cite obviously the problems in the last few years, but it is very very sad when the whole point of a Morris Minor and Charles Ware was to make the point that a Morris Minor is basically the only car that you will ever need, and you can make it last many generations hence. So it's a shame about that, but at least you can still get parts from them, because they do make original parts
Yeah.
in Sri Lanka.
I mean, that sentence has been going how long? About 30 years, James? 30
Yeah, I
years?
think seven. Well, yeah, I think it's from 1976. I think
Oh, is
that is a
it?
very
Right.
yeah. I think it's a very very long time. And I mean, I have been there, and it was amazing to see how many miners that they had actually in stock and in bits and pieces and so forth. But it's just a shame that a certain aspect of that business doesn't seem to make any financial sense anymore,
Yeah.
which is such a shame.
I think the problem is that people are restoring cars and then looking to sell them,
Mm.
and the cost of restoring them doesn't reflect in the sale price. And for many cars, for some, of course, it does.
Yeah.
But things like a Morris Minor, it's just not going to. And unfortunately, I think that's the way things are. But you're right, James. It's difficult news to take, really, because it's been in existence for such a long time and done such a good job for so many years. But we wish them well with the continuation of the parts business. And I think on that note, we shall take a break. You're listening to Bangers and Classics, the official podcast of the festive season hangover. So welcome back after that break. And it's time for Banger or Classic. And I gave a bit of thought to this one this week just for a change. And I came up with the Nissan Micro. Now, not the third generation, but I think we can concentrate on the first two generations, certainly the ones that I'm familiar with from here. James, what do you think to that?
Well, I don't know, really, David. I think it's a foregone conclusion, isn't it, about where we're going with this one?
Maybe
because you told me before. I mean, you've been traumatized by one, so.
Well, yeah. I mean, what happened? What happened was, as a certain comedian used to say, was that some years ago, my work used to take me down to various parts of England to do hearings. And my classic car at the time was a Matron Arena, but I wasn't going to drive it down to Birmingham or Nottingham and leave it lying around. So my everyday car had blown its engine and the road back from Liverpool one. So it was getting fixed. So while it was getting fixed, and took quite a while, I had to rent cars. And I had a succession of okay cars. I had a Ford Fiesta back. This was about 1998 or 1999, I think. And Fiesta, yeah, it was fine. Fiat Punto, which I thought was very good. Volkswagen Polo, again, not too bad at all. And the last time, they gave me a Nissan Micro. And I thought, do I look like Noddy or Big Ears? However, okay, fine. I've heard these drive well. I'll give it a chance. And I drove it back from Birmingham on the M6. And it was horrendous. It was no fun whatsoever. At one stage, I'd have been happier walking, I reckon. That's how bad it was. Now, it may be that I got a bad car. I don't know. But the experience was not a pleasant one, shall we say, James?
Yeah.
And it put me off them. Apart from the fact, as I say, they looked like noddy cars. This would be, I think, the second generation. Second generation that I'm familiar with anyway, because I didn't bother to research this. Because my verdict was a foregone conclusion. But we've had so many classics that we've got to chuck in a banger. And I'm sorry, Nissan fans, this, to me at least, is a banger. You may disagree, which is fine. What do you reckon, James?
Oh no, it is a banger, and lots of people learn to drive in them. Obviously, I'm too old, and you're too old because we learned to drive in Model T Fords. But there's a whole generation of people who learned to drive in them, so they have a certain affection for them. I think I mentioned before the engines used a lot by grass trackers. They used to put them into minis and stuff like that. So the actual engine is very, very unbreakable. But actually, as a banger, it is basically a 5-star one because they will go on forever. Rust will obviously always kill them eventually, but it is one of those cars you can buy for a few £100 and it will just go on and on and on. It'll probably become unroadworthy at some point, but it actually will still work. So as a banger, it deserves all the accolades. As a classic, I think it's got some going before it actually becomes a classic. And maybe when there's about 3 left, we might let one of them be a classic. but I don't think it's going to end up in a museum. But maybe it will do with a British School of Motoring sign on it.
Yes, I was going to say something really obnoxious here about them, but I'm not going to. I have to offer you a counterpoint, James. My wife had one long before I met her, and she likes them. She really thinks, oh, they were great little cars, and I'm staggered. I really am staggered. What I want to know is, James, if we were to buy one of these cars and run it around as a banger, do you get a free Noddy costume with it?
Well, you could do.
Well, yeah. I mean, it might be great for Christmas. People might think you're an elf or something. One of Santa's little helpers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I'm sorry. It's just not doing it for me. And I did give it a try. So what else can I say? Banger, end of story. And I'm not even going to say a 5-star banger. Yeah. No, they are reliable. I'll give them that. But if you ever wanted a car not to be reliable, that might be the one, guys. That might be the one. But there we have it. Anyways, shall we move on now to what should we do next, James? more Christmas gifts for car
Well,
nuts.
yeah, we could do, couldn't we?
Yes. I was just thinking here. Scalextric. What about
Mm.
Scalextric?
Yeah, that's a good idea, isn't it?
We never talk about it.
No.
Were you a Scalextric fan as a boy?
Well, I actually had something that wasn't Scalextric. What was it? There was an Airfix version of
That's right.
Scalextric.
Yeah.
Um,
MRRC.
I don't know what it was called, but that's what I had when I was a much younger man. I don't know whether I would presume Scalextric was going at the same time, and maybe this was 2 and 6 cheaper or something. I don't know, but
Um, Scalextric, I think, came out in the 60s, didn't it?
yeah, well, this was definitely 60s because that's when I had the Airfix. But whether they looked at the Airfix and thought we can do better than that, I don't know. But yes, slot car racing is one of those great things. I once did a story for Supercar Classics actually about slot car racers, and they had a massive, massive shed in North London, and it was the biggest, obviously, set
Oh, wait a
you'd
minute.
ever seen, and it was,
Yeah.
it was like 10 lane. It was ridiculous. But it was the biggest thing ever. One of the coldest days of my life. There's no heating in there. I was
Did,
absolutely frozen stiff, but it was just amazing. And you have to be so good to actually get around the circuit without falling off. It's so difficult to do it properly, and you actually get an incredible respect for the people who spend an awful lot of time doing it. Yeah, it's there's a lot more to it than you actually think, and obviously you can still do it at older ages and get as much fun out of it, probably more than you did as a youngster.
yeah. I mean, I think I've got that article, James.
Have you?
Do you mention Johnny Herbert in it? No, no, seriously. I think he was third in some sort of London Grand Prix as a teenager.
Oh,
London
really?
Electric Grand Prix, yeah. I mean, Johnny Herbert, the racing driver, obviously,
Yeah,
we're talking about. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
pretty sure. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not sure if he
I
won
thought
it.
you were being really sizes there, David. I was
No,
quite
no,
shocked.
no, 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 no,
Yeah,
no, 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 no. I'm not going to say anything about that. No, I wouldn't do that sort of
of
thing.
course not. No.
No, no, not publicly anyway. No, Johnny Herbert did, I believe. He finished in a podium. He may have won it. A
Mm,
stock car. I'm not sure if it was your article because I'm pretty sure I've got that in an issue of Supercar Classics. I've certainly read it.
yeah. Oh, I haven't read it for years. I haven't read it
Hmm.
since I wrote it. So
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you write something. You tend to never go back to it, or
no, that's
seldom go
right.
back to it. Yeah.
Yeah,
But cars that are raced competitively in slot car racing are a world apart from electric cars. A lot of these things have got custom made bodies, etc. They're very expensive and they are hugely fast. They're ridiculously fast, and it's the sort of thing you have to actually see to experience. You know, just how fast these things go, and the level of control it takes, and the level of practice it takes to get really good at it. As you say, James, it's great. But
absolutely.
Scalextrics can be great fun, and you can even play it on your own. Now you're going to say, how are you going to do that? Well, what you do is this is what I had to do. I'm the only child. I got a stopwatch and I would set up Grand Prix weekends with various cars, and I'd maybe time them for 3 laps. That would be qualifying them for a race 10 laps. And if I spun off, I stopped the race, started it again, and added 3 seconds or something onto the time, and that was it. So you can have a world of fun doing that. So you can actually even play it on your own if you've got no one to play it with, as was often the case with me. I've told you before about mum tying sausages around my neck to get the dog to play with me, and that's kind of how it was.
Absolutely. And strangely enough, I do have a reasonable story, and I would presume it would have been Scalextric. My dad in the 60s used to do advertising and promotion and things, and it was involved with something to do with Jack Brabham, and
Mm.
they were at Selfridges. They had a big Scalextric type board set up. I think he would have been world champion by then. And my dad said he was organising all of this. And obviously, it's like a complete nightmare because there's press there and all sorts of people. But there was loads of school kids there playing. They actually let them play with the Scalextric. And then I said he eventually had to get all of these controllers off these little kids because Jack Brabham was coming, and eventually he managed that. And they'd been racing extremely well, and Jack Brabham obviously fell off at the first corner because it's so difficult to do. And he said it was the most embarrassing thing because I'd love to know what it was a promotion for. My dad did tell me. I've forgotten it in the mist of time. I don't think it was promoting Scalextric. I cannot remember. It must have been something else, but he was probably endorsing some sort of product. But I think that proves that just because you can drive a car doesn't mean you can drive a Scalextric.
Yeah, I mean, quite often they had Grand Prix drivers and racing Scalextrics, and I don't think they were terribly good at it. There's a world of a difference between sitting in a racing car and being handed the hand control and saying, "Hey, drive this
Yeah.
around this track." It's a slightly different discipline. Of course, once they get used to it, I
Mm.
imagine with their reflexes and judgment, they'd be brilliant, but that wasn't really going to happen. I don't suppose we're too
No.
interested. Yes, so I think on that note, we shall take another break. This is the count. I just want to say that the two presenters of this podcast are even bigger pains in the neck than me. So he joined us again after that short break. James and I were just discussing while the mics were off, or the recording software was off, as to whether or not there's a sanity clause. It's a very appropriate topic of debate at this time of year.
Yeah.
Probably better not go into that too much. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about, James, in the context of Christmas gifts for petrol heads. Well, I think we've mentioned before there's a new classic car magazine out this year called Classic Retro Modern. And one thing I have noticed about them is that they do feature unusual cars in it. They go away from the mainstream and they find some interesting classics to talk about. Classics that perhaps are lesser known here. There are fewer of them, but they're nonetheless very interesting. It's good to see a magazine do that. So, monthly magazine, the charge was at £5 a copy. You can get, producing a magazine is very tough in this day and age. It's not like the days of yore. So every subscriber, every sale they get, I'm sure they will be very grateful for, and they are good enough to merit getting plenty of those, I think.
Yep, that's right. Go and get your copy. Go and get your copy now.
Yeah, now that James has woken up, that's it.
Yeah, no, that's right. I have a more successful magazine than mine, so there you go.
He was sleeping off the mulled wine and the mince pies. We upgraded the mince pies this week from last week, and he scoffed a lot again. I'm sorry to say. He's eyeing up the Christmas decorations here. I don't know what he's going to do with them, so I'm quite concerned. Once he's got a couple of glasses of mulled wine in him, even the alcohol-free stuff turns into a completely different person, you know. Anyway, we are not going to do another challenge this week. We didn't do it last week, so we're not going to do it this week. We're going to go back to last week's format, which is find a classic car, £10,000 budget, any car you like, just make it a good one, and we'll talk about that. And Mr. Ruppert, what have you found?
Oh, right. Oh, it's me.
It's you.
It's me, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, they sprung that on you.
Well, there you go. I do, David. I'm like a broken record. I go down the same route, but it's very strange. I'm looking at cars which are for sale in the UK, and I'm quite bored by what I see. I'm not excited. I'm not challenged. I'm not interested. But as soon as I go abroad, as soon as I hop across the pond, as soon as I go continental, there's a world of possibility. And the world of possibility this week is Fiat shaped. And I did find, well, the thing was, I bet you love a Fiat 130. And I bet you like the ones which I bet you like the saloon, and I bet you like a coupe. And these are about £3,000-4,000. Now, it's important to either Google Translate what's there, because they are very solid looking cars. They are not completely rust free, but you're paying around 3,000 to 4,000 euros, and you're thinking to yourself, "Wow, I can get a Fiat 130, 2.8 litre engine in it for just a few £1,000s, but it will require some work. It is solid, it is complete." And I also found a 130 coupe for a very similar price, and you just think to yourself, "Wow." They're so interesting, and again, these are cars you do not see, especially on our roads.
Cars from the glory days of Fiat. Yeah,
very, 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 very much so. But it will require, and if you're into that, if you're into doing a bit of work and sourcing some parts, that might be just the thing. Just buy a trailer, and for not a great deal of money, you can bring something back that will interest and amuse and probably frustrate you. But I can think of worse things to do with your spare time. And effectively, that's what I did a few years ago. But the advantage was it was all mini bits underneath, so I knew that was going to be an easy bit if I needed something to actually make it work. But these might be a bit more of a challenge. So what I did was, because I know you'd probably have a go at me, and even though I'd have quite a lot of my budget left, I did find a complete in Spain this time. It's a Fiat 850 Coupe, 1968. and that was €7,500. And yeah, it looks absolutely lovely. Again, a car you do not see. Yeah, a very lovely 60s, vehicle. It's the sort of car that Fiat excelled at making, and I think it would be a joy to own. So yeah, I just thought that was closer to the end of the budget. I'm not saving money. I'm not saving mythical money again that I can invest in cryptocurrency or anything. I just wanted to spend as much of it as possible and have a little buffer at the end. But my point is with this, and it will probably, in the continuing weeks that we do this, I'll probably just be abroad every time. I do apologise for that, but it's worth looking further afield because you do see some very interesting cars. And that's it for me, David.
You better stay away from Transylvania. That's all I'm
Oh,
saying.
right. No, I love
Yeah.
being there. It's great. I know it's a bit rough for you, David, but some of us in the XJS had a nice time.
Yeah, but I still asked you for that dishwasher.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's all about. I have no knowledge of this.
Yeah.
What surprised me, James, is you went for an Italian car 2 weeks in a row.
I have. That's very true. I think it's your effect. I think it's once I start going for French cars, everybody should worry and unsubscribe from the podcasts.
Oh, we have subscribers, do we? Right.
Yeah.
Blimey, poor souls. I'm not going to say any more about that because I'm just not. Yes. Well, there's lots to be said, of course. On your €7,500, James, you've got to remember we've got to pay import duty nowadays.
Oh, have we? Oh, dear.
Yeah, you're going to get stiffed for VAT, I reckon.
Oh, right.
It. And of course, you got the MOT, etc. here. But you know what? You can still buy cars in Europe that you can't get here, and you can probably get them cheaper in many cases.
Yeah.
As long as you're not my left-hand drive, and so what? If that's what you won't get it. Life's too short, guys. Anyway, I did go to Europe as well for a little. Wow. Didn't stay there, but my first port of call, it was a bit too expensive because once I worked out bringing in import duty, etc. But I had a look at a 1983 Talbot Matra Murena in Jaune Mimosa, yellow mimosa, or mimosa yellow even. This in Spain, 72,500 miles on the clock. Aftermarket alloys on it. It's got the less attractive brown interior. It's a later Murena because I can tell by the interior. It's a striped interior, but because of the colour, it's a brown stripe as opposed to the more desirable black stripe. However, it's a nice car, 2.2. The only fault it have is it's a standard engine, and you really want one with the extra power. Either the ESC or the 142 kit models, which do have a bit of extra oomph. But this one looks very nice at order indeed, and you can find it in Car and Classic. It's a nice looking example. The only thing, of course, is it's yellow. It's in the summer, it's going to get covered in flies. That will happen. So, taking my £10,000 budget, I thought, what can we go for that's a little bit close to home? And I found something. And James is going to fall off his perch here because I went for a German car.
All right.
Yes. I found a Volkswagen Corrado VR6 near Leicester for £9,500. It's a white one. It's done about 139,000 miles. The odometer reads more because it was changed. They had to put a higher mileage one in it, apparently. There were problems with the instrument binnacle, and they changed it for another binnacle at a higher mileage. And the MOT history certainly bears that out. You're not going to do 60,000 miles a year in one of these cars in 2020. It's just not going to happen. The condition of the car looks good. The seller gives a very good account of it. And he says it was put in dry storage in 2005 and was purchased by him February 2019, been recommissioned. And certainly the MOT history, such as there is from 2019 to date, is very good. I think there was one fail and a couple of minor things and a couple of passes. So it's got current MOT, I think, to next summer from memory. And it's had lots of work done to it. It's had new timing chain, new clutch, tappets have been done, and the fuel tank has been dropped out and flushed, new fuel pump. So, yeah, it looks very good indeed. And apparently there's no rust on it. It's been off the road for so long. It's got the lovely narrow angle V6 engine, or the VR6 engine, if you want to call it that. And goes very well, handles very well, and looks good. Corrado looked good from day one, and the styling still looks good more than 30 years later. So if you're interested in buying a 90s coupe, then that one should certainly be well up on your list, and certainly have a look at it. I would, if I were in the market for one. You'll find it on piston heads, if you're wondering. And as I say, I would certainly direct you there to have a look and hopefully perhaps a purchase. So there we go. James has gone Italian, I've gone German. What will next week bring us? Maybe we'll go Japanese.
Yeah, we could do. You see, 9,000 sounds like quite a lot of money, and then when you describe what's happened to it, you go, no, that's not at all,
No.
is it? Because
Oh,
you couldn't buy a contemporary coupe that would be half as much fun for anywhere near that.
no, and prices of Corrados have gone up.
Mm.
So, having dealt with the challenge, James, let's jump into the time machine and head back to the 1970s. Now, I once wrote a piece called Death of the 1970s Snob, and I can't find it anywhere. And I'm really annoyed about that because I actually quite liked that one.
Mm.
But that got me thinking, well, cars of the 1970s snobs. What car would a snob in the 1970s have? And I think the answers would surprise a lot of modern people. We're not talking about BMWs or Audis or Mercedes. Yes, some snobs would have those, but things like a Ford Cortina Ghia, that would be a car for a snob in the 70s, wouldn't you say, James?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, it's what's called marketing, and it was very cleverly exploited by the people at Ford who were masters at it. And it was mainly car park snobbery, but that also extended to down the road snobbery as well, in that you wanted to have a better car than your neighbour at the time.
Hmm.
So, yeah, if there was any difference that could be made by what was on the lip of the boot lid, you would go for it if
Hmm.
you could afford it.
Yeah, well, I mean, in those days, having a GL specification over an L was a big thing
Mm,
for a lot of people. I mean, the GL had a clock, for goodness
mm,
sake. The L didn't. And
yeah.
you really had to have that clock. So, yeah, I mean, things like a Ford Cortina Ghia, uh, a Capri, what would you say would be a snobbish Capri, James? Would you see any of those being particularly snobbish?
Well, yeah. I mean, you could get an awful lot of packs on certainly the earlier ones. There was a whole, yeah. You could get, an XL, a GXL, couldn't you? A GLXL, XL. A G. There was GT. There was actually an awful lot of it. I think I once wrote about how many possible combinations there were. It was absolutely phenomenal. The different packs, and then you could have an executive pack as well.
Hmm,
I think with the Capri and
of course,
certainly with the
yes.
Cortina. So there was an awful lot of options, and it was an awful lot of fun. It made ordering a car. Um, you know, People talk about specking a car now online. I don't really get very much out of that at all, really. But I'd rather look at a brochure.
Oh, God, yeah.
Assemble my car from a brochure.
Yeah. Mm. Well, I mean, the executive pack was a big thing. It
Yeah,
actually continued even into the 90s.
yeah, I think it did.
With some cars, oh, the executive pack. I remember Matra, we talked about the Matra
Mm,
Marina. I'm sure the Matra Marina 1.6, there was an optional executive pack in it, which, from memory, I think was tinted glass, electric windows, and alloy wheels.
yeah,
You got one of those and you were suddenly an executive. Brilliant. You
that's
know,
right.
you probably got a free key to the executive toilet in the workplace as well.
What he could have done
Yeah.
when it came to French cars, David, because this is your angle. I think there was a business pack, wasn't there, for Renaults and stuff like that. I think they had going into the 80s and 90s. I can't remember.
I can't remember either, to be
No.
honest. Well, I mean, I wouldn't be the target market, let's be honest, for such like, yes, we'll not sell this to Wurzel Gummidge. No, no, I don't want him getting the car. Other snobbish cars of the
Mm.
70s, James, might be things like Lancias. The Lancia Beta, for a time, had a certain cachet, as I recall it. More so than the German cars. There was something
Yeah, I would
stylish.
agree with that. And also, when you look at 1970s programs, there's a colossal amount of Lancias and certainly some of the Fiats I mentioned.
Mm,
Like the 130. Yes, people hadn't switched entirely to German cars by then. I would completely agree that having a Lancia was quite a nice thing to have at the time.
mm. It still is. I mean, if
Yeah,
it's an old Lancia, yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
I would go along with that. But of course, things changed, as you say, and we moved away from that. But there were some really interesting cars back in time. You can look for them yourself. Have a look online and try and put yourself back in the minds of somebody from the 70s. Now, Christmas obviously is coming. It's a time for nostalgia. Wallow in it a little bit. Try to imagine you're back there and think about the kind of car you would have. And of course, snobbery still exists. I mean, not just in cars, also, as we've discussed before, in walls. But we've already mentioned that one. I think on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening to this week's podcast. Hope you tune in next time.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. Yeah, and talking about the 1970s, Caroline Munro's outside in a Triumph Stag, but we can talk about that next week.
Oh, no, we can't. I think we have to talk about it this week. Forget what I just said.
Well, you can't because I haven't. I don't know
Ah,
what she said to me yet. When
oh,
I find out,
no.
I have no idea, and I even stayed up last night. And
All right.
yeah, but there you go.
All
So
right.
uh,
Well,
we'll have to investigate that, David.
yes.
It's
Well,
very important.
as soon as we finish recording this, listeners,
Yeah,
I'm going to be asking James a lot of questions about this. I completely forgot about it, and how could I? But now that he's reminded me,
yeah,
I'm on the case.
yeah.
See you
But
next time.
she's sounding the horn, David. I've got to go.